The world breathes in cycles. Long before clocks and calendars, the earth moved to an ancient rhythm, a pulse woven into the very fabric of existence. Civilizations rose and fell by it, measuring time not in hours but in seasons. The ancients believed the seasons were not just weather patterns, but cosmic forces, divine energies that shape both the world and the soul. The world moves to an ancient rhythm, one that existed long before humans measured time in hours and days. The seasons are not just shifts in temperature or cycles of weather. They are manifestations of a far greater truth, a law that governs all existence. For much of modern history, time has been perceived as a straight line, always moving forward, never repeating. The past is behind us, the present is fleeting, and the future is unknown. But this perception is a modern invention, shaped by mechanical clocks and industrial progress. To the ancients, time was not linear, it was cyclical. They observed it in the waxing and waning of the moon, the rhythmic rise and fall of the tides, and the ever-repeating pattern of the seasons. Time did not rush towards an unknown future. It moved in great circles, each phase giving way to the next, only to return again. The cycle of the seasons was their greatest proof. Life itself followed this pattern: birth in spring, growth in summer, decline in autumn, and death in winter, before the cycle began anew. Just as nature moved through this sequence, so too did civilizations, generations, and the lives of every living being. Nothing was permanent, yet nothing was ever truly lost. This understanding was central to the spiritual traditions of nearly every ancient culture. The Egyptians viewed time as an eternal loop, reflected in the flooding of the Nile, which destroyed and renewed the land each year. The Norse spoke of an age-ending winter, Fimbulwinter, which would precede Ragnarok, the destruction and rebirth of the cosmos. In Hindu thought, time was divided into vast epochs known as yugas, each one mirroring the phases of creation, expansion, decline, and dissolution. Even in Christian tradition, history is seen as moving through distinct ages, culminating in destruction, judgment, and ultimate renewal. These civilizations did not see the seasons as random environmental shifts. They saw them as expressions of the same cosmic order that governs all of existence. The cycle of the seasons was not just about weather. It was a mirror of the universe itself, a pattern that shaped not only the earth, but the heavens, the gods, and the fate of all things. In many mystical traditions, the human soul was believed to move through its own seasons. Spring represented youth, filled with boundless energy and the promise of new beginnings. Summer was the height of power, when the self flourished and took action in the world. Autumn marked the gathering of wisdom, the time of harvest, when lessons were learned and preparation for the next phase began. Winter was the season of retreat, of silence and contemplation, when all things returned to the source before being reborn once more. The world and the soul were bound to the same rhythm. To understand the seasons was to understand oneself. The changing of the seasons was also tied to the eternal balance between light and darkness, warmth and cold, expansion and contraction. Summer, ruled by the sun, was a time of radiance, activity, and external growth. But it could not last forever. A fire that burns too brightly will eventually consume itself. Winter, ruled by darkness, was a time of stillness, withdrawal, and inner transformation. Without it, life would never renew itself. The interplay between these forces was not a battle, but a necessary dance. Neither side could exist without the other. The sun must set before it can rise again. The lesson of the seasons is one of acceptance. Everything must move through its cycle. Nothing stays in full bloom forever, just as nothing remains barren indefinitely. The same force that brings the warmth of spring also brings the cold of winter. The same law that allows us to rise will one day demand that we fall. To resist this truth is to suffer. To embrace it is to find harmony with the very fabric of existence. Ancient civilizations did not merely endure the seasons. They honored them, aligning their lives, rituals, and societies with their rhythm. The more we study their wisdom, the more we begin to see that the seasons are not just markers of time, but teachers, guiding us through the mysteries of change, impermanence, and renewal. The cycle of the seasons is, in the end, the cycle of life itself. It is a reminder that while all things must pass, all things will return. Since the dawn of civilization, humans have sought to understand the forces that govern their world. Among the most powerful and inescapable of these forces were the seasons, shaping the landscape, determining survival, and marking the passage of time. But to the ancient mind, the turning of the seasons was not simply the result of shifting planetary orbits and axial tilts. It was something greater, a divine drama, a cosmic story played out across the heavens and the earth. The ancients did not merely observe the seasons, they personified them, turned them into gods and spirits, and wove them into mythologies that revealed deep truths about life, death, and renewal. These myths were not just primitive attempts to explain the natural world, they were esoteric codes, stories embedded with wisdom about the eternal cycle that governs all things. One of the most well-known seasonal myths comes from ancient Greece, the story of Persephone and the underworld. According to legend, Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and fertility, was abducted by Hades, the ruler of the underworld. Stricken with grief, Demeter refused to let anything grow, plunging the world into an eternal winter. Desperate to save humanity from starvation, the gods intervened, striking a bargain that allowed Persephone to return to the surface for half of the year. Each time she rose, life returned, spring blossomed, crops flourished, and warmth filled the land. But when she descended again, the world grew cold, barren, and lifeless, marking the arrival of autumn and winter. This story was far more than an explanation for the changing of the seasons. It was a metaphor for the human soul's journey, an allegory of descent and return, loss and renewal. Just as Persephone was forced into darkness before she could emerge into the light, so too must all things, whether in nature, the body, or the spirit, pass through periods of death before they can be reborn. The same theme appears in the myths of Egypt, where the god Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, was murdered, dismembered, and cast into the waters of the Nile. His wife Isis gathered his scattered remains and resurrected him, allowing him to conceive a son before retreating into the underworld. His death was mourned as the dry season, when the Nile ceased to flood, and his return marked the annual inundation that brought fertility back to the land. His body became the land itself, dying and reviving with the seasons. Similar stories of dying and rising gods are found across the world. The Mesopotamians worshipped Tammuz, whose death in the heat of summer mirrored the withering of crops, and whose return brought renewal. The Celts honored Cernunnos, a horned god who ruled over the wild lands, dying in the autumn, only to be reborn with the first buds of spring. The Norse told of Baldur, the shining god of purity and light, whose death at the hands of Loki sent the world into mourning, an event that heralded the beginning of Ragnarok, the end and rebirth of the world. Even Christianity, which is often viewed as distinct from older pagan traditions, carries the same seasonal motif. The death and resurrection of Christ follows the same ancient pattern: sacrifice, descent into darkness, and triumphant return. Easter, the celebration of Christ's resurrection, is itself tied to older spring festivals like Ostara, which honored the return of warmth, fertility, and life to the earth. What all of these myths reveal is a universal truth. The changing of the seasons is not just something that happens in the sky and on the land. It is a spiritual process, a fundamental rhythm that governs all aspects of existence. The transition from spring to summer represents the peak of life's energy, the time of youth, action, and creation. The shift from summer to autumn mirrors the gathering of wisdom, the slowing down before the inevitable fall. Autumn into winter reflects the necessary descent, the period of withdrawal and contemplation. Winter into spring is the resurrection, the eternal promise that what has died will always return, renewed and transformed. These myths were not just stories, they were guides to understanding the deeper mysteries of existence. They showed that nothing is ever truly lost, only changed. That even in the depths of winter, the seeds of spring are waiting beneath the frost. That darkness is not the end, but a phase in the eternal cycle. The ancients did not separate the seasons from their spiritual beliefs. They understood that the earth itself was a reflection of the divine, and that the turning of the seasons was not just an external phenomenon, but a process mirrored within the human soul. In the modern world, we often think of myths as outdated relics of a time when people lacked scientific understanding. But perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps these ancient myths contain a knowledge we have lost, one that teaches us how to move with the natural rhythms of life, instead of against them. Because the cycle of the seasons is not just happening around us, it is happening within us. Every moment of life is part of this great rhythm, the endless dance between creation and destruction, light and darkness, life and death. The seasons do not exist in isolation. They are woven into the fabric of the natural world, interlaced with forces both visible and unseen. Across ancient civilizations, the changing of the seasons was understood not just as a shift in climate, but as a manifestation of the four classical elements: earth, water, air, and fire. These elements were not just poetic metaphors. They were believed to be the fundamental building blocks of existence, governing both the material and spiritual realms. Each season carries the dominant energy of one of these elements. Winter is water, the season of stillness and introspection. Spring is air, the breath of renewal and new beginnings. Summer is fire, the height of energy, passion, and intensity. Autumn is earth, the grounding force of harvest, wisdom, and preparation. Through this elemental cycle, nature undergoes its own alchemical transformation, a process mirrored within the human spirit. As the world shifts through the elements, so do we. Winter is the season of cold, darkness, and retreat. It is the time when rivers freeze, snow blankets the land, and all visible life slows to a near halt. It is governed by the element of water, not in the rushing rivers of spring or the crashing waves of summer, but in its stillest form, deep, frozen, silent, yet immensely powerful. Water is the element of intuition, emotion, and the subconscious. Just as lakes and oceans hold mysteries beneath their surface, winter invites us inward to explore the hidden depths of the self. This is why many ancient traditions saw winter as a time for spiritual work, solitude, and introspection. In many myths, water is the boundary between worlds, the river of the underworld, the sacred well of knowledge, the abyss of creation. It is a symbol of death, purification, and renewal, all themes of the winter season. Ancient peoples built their midwinter rituals around fire and light, not only to survive the cold, but to symbolize the return of warmth and life after the depths of darkness. Just as water remains beneath the ice, life continues beneath the frozen earth, waiting. Winter teaches us patience, reminding us that beneath the surface, transformation is always happening. With the first thaw of winter, the air itself seems to change. The wind carries warmth, the scent of rain, the soft hum of awakening life. Spring belongs to air, the element of movement, transition, and new beginnings. Air is the unseen force that carries seeds across great distances, spreads pollen, and awakens the dormant world. It is the breath of life itself, the force that stirs the still waters of winter and breathes vitality back into nature. In esoteric traditions, air is linked to thought, inspiration, and knowledge, making spring the season of ideas, new ventures, and forward motion. It is no coincidence that many creation myths begin with wind or breath. In Genesis, God breathes life into Adam. In Hindu tradition, the breath of Vayu, the wind god, is what gives movement to the cosmos. The Egyptians believed that Shu, the god of air, separated the heavens and the earth, creating space for life to exist. Spring is a time of action, but not of completion. The winds of spring do not bear the weight of finality, they carry possibility, stirring potential into motion. Spring teaches us that to begin is enough. It reminds us that all things, no matter how great, start with a single breath. As the world bursts into full bloom and the days stretch long into the evening, the season of fire takes its throne. Summer is heat, passion, strength, and intensity, the sun at its highest, life at its fullest. Fire is the element of transformation, destruction, and rebirth. It is what turns wood into ash, metal into molten gold, raw materials into something new. This is the season of creation and consumption, when energy burns at its brightest before decline begins. Ancient civilizations honored fire as the most sacred of elements, believing it to be the divine force of both creation and destruction. In Hinduism, the god Agni was the living fire, the mouth of the gods, the link between the mortal and the divine. The Greeks saw fire as the gift of Prometheus, stolen from the heavens to empower humanity. The Celts celebrated Letha, the summer solstice, with great bonfires, symbolizing the sun's peak before its slow descent. But fire is a double-edged force. What burns too brightly consumes itself. The summer sun, though vital, can also scorch the earth, wither crops, and exhaust energy. In the same way, unchecked ambition, endless work, or prolonged intensity can lead to burnout. Summer teaches us the importance of balance, that while power and energy are vital, they must be tempered, or they will destroy the very things they seek to nourish. As the fire of summer fades, the world turns golden, the leaves crisp and fall, and the air carries a cool stillness. Autumn belongs to earth, the element of stability, wisdom, and completion. This is the season of harvest, the moment when all the effort of spring and summer bears fruit. Crops are gathered, food is stored, and preparation for the coming winter begins. In a deeper sense, autumn is a time of reflection, of learning from the past, of gathering knowledge and wisdom. Earth represents grounding and structure, the force that holds everything together. In many traditions, the earth is the mother, the source of all life. The Greeks called her Gaia, the Norse called her Jord, and countless indigenous cultures revered her as the sacred foundation upon which all things stand. But autumn is also a time of letting go. Just as trees shed their leaves, autumn reminds us that not everything is meant to be held onto forever. It is a season of acceptance, of release, of recognizing that endings are just as sacred as beginnings. Where spring teaches us to start, summer teaches us to act, and winter teaches us to wait. Autumn teaches us to appreciate what we have, to reap what we have sown, and to surrender what no longer serves us. The journey through the seasons is an alchemical transformation, a continuous process of death, rebirth, purification, and refinement. Just as metals must endure fire to become gold, just as seeds must break apart before they can grow, life itself moves through this great elemental cycle. Winter stills the world so spring can stir it awake. Spring sets things in motion so summer can bring them to fruition. Summer allows life to thrive so autumn can teach it how to let go. Autumn prepares the way for winter's stillness, and the cycle begins anew. This is not just the rhythm of the natural world. It is the rhythm of our own lives, our growth, our transformations. The elements do not just govern the seasons. They shape us, guide us, and move through us. Throughout history, humans have lived by the rhythm of the seasons, not just as a means of survival, but as a sacred alignment with the forces of nature. The changing of the seasons was not simply observed, it was celebrated, honored, and ritualized. Every equinox, every solstice, every shift from one season to the next was seen as a moment of divine transformation, a gateway between worlds, a time when the veil between the physical and the spiritual grew thin. Ancient civilizations built their lives around these transitions. They constructed monuments aligned with the solstices, held grand festivals to honor the forces of nature, and engaged in sacred rites to ensure harmony between humanity and the cosmos. These traditions were not merely cultural customs. They were expressions of deep spiritual understanding, a recognition that the movement of the earth through the seasons reflected the greater cycles of existence, death, and renewal. The modern world has largely forgotten this connection, reducing seasonal changes to little more than weather forecasts and holiday sales. But the ancient wisdom remains, buried beneath time, waiting to be rediscovered. To understand these festivals is to understand how humanity once lived in harmony with the sacred cycle, embracing the lessons of each season through ritual, reverence, and transformation. One of the most enduring seasonal traditions is the Wheel of the Year, a sacred cycle of festivals observed by pre-Christian European cultures, particularly the Celts, the Norse, and later adapted into many modern pagan traditions. The Wheel of the Year is divided into 8 major festivals, each marking a key turning point in the solar and agricultural cycle. At the heart of this tradition are the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. Between these celestial events lie 4 cross-quarter festivals, marking the transition between seasons. These festivals were seen as gateways, moments when the natural world shifted and the veil between realms grew thin. In the depths of winter, people gathered to celebrate Yule, the festival of the winter solstice, honoring the rebirth of the sun. Bonfires were lit, evergreen trees were decorated, and feasts were held to call back the light during the longest night of the year. This tradition, later absorbed into Christmas, was a recognition that even in the darkest time, the promise of renewal remained. As winter gave way to spring, the festival of Imbolc was celebrated, marking the first stirrings of life beneath the frozen earth. Sacred to the goddess Brigid, this festival was a time of purification, fire rituals, and welcoming the return of fertility and light. The spring equinox, known as Ostara, was the moment of perfect balance when day and night stood equal, and the earth awakened from its slumber. Eggs, symbols of fertility, were decorated and exchanged, a custom that survives today in Easter celebrations. With the arrival of summer, Beltane was honored as a festival of fire and passion, a time of great fertility rites where people leapt over flames to ensure health and prosperity. This was a time when the veil between worlds was thin, not for spirits of the dead, but for the unseen forces of love, desire, and creation. At the height of the sun's power, Litha, the summer solstice, marked the longest day of the year. Bonfires were again lit, and celebrations lasted late into the night as people honored the full radiance of life before the inevitable descent into darkness began. As summer turned to autumn, Lugnasad, also known as Lammas, was the festival of the first harvest. Grain was gathered, bread was baked, and people gave thanks for the abundance of the earth while preparing for the coming decline. The autumn equinox, known as Mabon, was another moment of balance, as the world stood poised between light and dark. This was a time of reflection, of honoring the fruits of one's labor, and of preparing for the darker half of the year. Finally, the most mysterious and feared of all seasonal festivals arrived. Samhain, the festival of the dead, the precursor to modern Halloween. This was the time when the boundary between the living and the spirit world was at its weakest, when ancestors were honored, spirits were appeased, and the mysteries of death were confronted. It was not a celebration of horror, as it is today, but of wisdom, a recognition that life and death are two sides of the same cycle. Across the world, ancient civilizations built great structures aligned with the turning points of the year, proving just how deeply they revered the cycles of nature. These sites were not random, they were designed with precision, acting as calendars, temples, and portals between worlds. Stonehenge, one of the most famous sacred sites, was carefully aligned with the summer and winter solstices, marking the exact points when the sun would rise and set at the turning of the seasons. People gathered here not just to measure time, but to connect with the cosmic forces that governed the earth. In Ireland, Newgrange, a massive passage tomb, older than the Egyptian pyramids, was constructed in such a way that on the winter solstice, sunlight would penetrate a narrow passage and illuminate the inner chamber. This was more than an architectural marvel. It was a ritual space for death, rebirth, and the renewal of the sun's power. The Mayans built Chichen Itza, where on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun creates the illusion of a great serpent descending down the temple steps. This was a sacred omen, a sign that the balance of the world was shifting. Even in Egypt, the Great Pyramids are believed to have been aligned with celestial events, reflecting the profound belief that the movements of the heavens dictated the fate of the earth. These monuments were not merely places of worship. They were portals to a deeper understanding of the universe, testaments to the belief that by aligning with the sacred cycle, one could unlock the secrets of life itself. The ancient world understood something that modern society has largely forgotten, that to live in harmony with the seasons is to live in harmony with the great forces of creation and destruction. They did not passively experience the seasons. They participated in them, honored them, and saw them as sacred teachers. Each festival, each ritual was not just a celebration, but a way of aligning oneself with the deeper rhythms of existence. Today, much of this knowledge has faded. The great seasonal festivals have been reduced to commercial holidays, stripped of their original purpose and meaning. But the wisdom remains, waiting to be rediscovered. Because the seasons have never stopped turning, the solstices still come. The equinoxes still mark the balance of light and dark. The sacred cycle continues just as it always has. The seasons are not just an external phenomenon, something that happens to the world around us. They are happening within us as well. The same forces that move the earth through cycles of growth, abundance, decline, and renewal also shape our emotions, thoughts, and personal transformations. Ancient cultures understood this connection. They saw human life as a reflection of the sacred cycle, where each stage of existence corresponded to one of the 4 seasons. Birth was spring, filled with new beginnings and potential. Youth and adulthood were summer, a time of energy and expansion. Maturity and aging were autumn, the season of wisdom, reflection, and letting go. And finally, old age and death were winter, the quiet descent into stillness before rebirth. But this cycle is not just something we experience once, from birth to death. We live through many seasons within a single lifetime. We pass through personal winters of loss and introspection, followed by springs of renewal and new beginnings. We burn through summers of passion and purpose, only to find ourselves in autumn once again, reaping the rewards of our efforts or facing the consequences of what we have sown. Life is not linear. It is cyclical, just like nature itself. Yet, in modern society, we have become disconnected from this rhythm. We no longer rest when we should rest, let go when we should release, or embrace change when transformation is necessary. Instead, we try to force ourselves into perpetual summer, always productive, always moving forward, always chasing growth. But nature does not work this way, and neither do we. To truly thrive, we must learn to align ourselves with the natural cycles of life, just as our ancestors did. Winter is the time of rest, contemplation, and inward focus. It is the season when nature slows down, when the trees stand bare and the earth turns cold. In our own lives, winter manifests as periods of solitude, introspection, and deep inner work. These are the moments when we are forced to turn inward to confront our thoughts, emotions, and past experiences. This could be a time of grief, healing, or personal transformation, when we are meant to pause and reflect rather than push forward. But modern life does not honor winter. Instead, we are told to be constantly active, constantly productive, constantly on. But winter exists for a reason. It is in these moments of stillness that true wisdom is found. When we allow ourselves to slow down, to sit in silence, to embrace the darkness rather than fear it, we can uncover truths that are otherwise drowned out by the noise of daily life. Winter teaches us that nothing in nature blooms forever. There must be times of rest and renewal before new growth can begin. After the stillness of winter, spring arrives as a breath of fresh air. This is the season of renewal, movement, and new possibilities. It is the time when the first buds push through the frost, when nature stirs from its slumber, when the world is reborn. In our own lives, spring represents times of inspiration, fresh starts, and creative energy. This could be a new job, a new relationship, or the first steps towards a long-held dream. It is a time of hope, excitement, and planting the seeds for what will come later. But just like in nature, not all seeds will grow. Spring is not about guarantees. It is about potential. It is about taking risks, about stepping into the unknown, about embracing the possibility of failure in pursuit of something greater. Spring teaches us that life is not about waiting for perfect conditions. It is about starting anyway. Even when the ground is still cold, even when uncertainty lingers, even when we are not sure if we are ready, we must plant the seeds of the future and trust that they will grow. Summer is the season of fullness, energy, and action. The sun stands at its highest, the days stretch long, and nature is alive with movement and vitality. In our own lives, summer represents moments of confidence, mastery, and external achievement. This is when the things we started in spring begin to flourish, when ideas take form, when we step fully into our power. But summer is also a test. It is not just a season of joy and ease, it is a season of responsibility. Just as crops require tending, just as the sun can scorch as easily as it can nourish, we must learn to manage our energy wisely. If we take on too much, if we burn too brightly, we risk exhaustion and collapse. This is where modern society struggles. We are encouraged to remain in endless summer, constantly working, constantly producing, constantly striving for more. But nature does not function this way. Summer must give way to autumn. Nothing can stay at its peak forever. Summer teaches us that success is not about endless expansion. It is about knowing when to step back, when to rest, and when to prepare for the next cycle. Autumn is the season of harvest, wisdom, and letting go. The heat of summer fades, the leaves begin to fall, and nature prepares for the stillness ahead. In our own lives, autumn is the time when we reap what we have sown, both the rewards and the lessons. This is a period of deep reflection, when we take stock of our journey so far. What have we built? What has flourished? What must be released? Not everything is meant to be carried forward. Just as trees shed their leaves, we must learn to let go of what no longer serves us. But many resist this season. We cling to things long past their time, afraid of endings, afraid of change. We hold on to relationships, jobs, and identities that no longer nourish us, unwilling to accept that some things must be released in order for something new to take their place. Autumn teaches us that release is not a loss, it is a necessity. It is a sacred act of trust, a recognition that by letting go, we create space for something greater. To align with nature's rhythm is to remember that we are not separate from the earth, we are part of it. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions all move through seasons just as the world does. There is a time for growth, a time for action, a time for rest, and a time for letting go. But modern society has pushed us out of this rhythm. We are expected to be constantly productive, constantly creating, constantly striving for more. We are not given permission to rest in winter, to slow down in autumn, to embrace change when spring arrives. We fight the natural cycle, and in doing so, we exhaust ourselves. To realign with the sacred cycle is not about changing nature. It is about changing ourselves. It is about listening to the wisdom of the seasons, about honoring the shifts within us rather than resisting them. It is about recognizing that every season has its purpose, that every phase of life is necessary, that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. The seasons govern the earth, but their rhythm extends far beyond the changing landscapes of our world. They are not just cycles of nature, they are reflections of a far greater pattern, one that governs the universe itself. The rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, the birth and death of stars, the evolution of civilizations, all of these follow the same eternal cycle of creation, expansion, decline, and rebirth. The ancients understood this. They saw the seasons not just as markers of time, but as sacred symbols of a universal law, a blueprint of existence itself. Their myths of dying and resurrecting gods, their rituals tied to solstices and equinoxes, their alignment of temples and monuments with celestial cycles, all of these were acts of remembrance, ways of honoring the cosmic rhythm that shapes all things. But somewhere along the way, we forgot. We moved away from nature, built walls to separate ourselves from the land, and created artificial timekeeping systems that severed us from the sacred cycle. In doing so, we lost something profound. We lost the knowledge that time does not move forward in a straight line. It turns endlessly, in cycles. The more we look, the clearer it becomes that the seasons are not just an earthly phenomenon, but an echo of something far greater. The same cycle of birth, growth, decay, and renewal plays out in the cosmos, in human history, in our own souls. The stars themselves are born, shine brightly for millions of years, then collapse, only to scatter their elements across the universe, seeding the birth of new stars, new planets, and new life. Entire civilizations follow the same pattern, rising to power, flourishing, then declining, only to give way to the birth of something new. Even within human consciousness, there are seasons, moments of enlightenment, periods of struggle, times of transformation. This is the great secret of the sacred cycle. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything is in motion, shifting from one state to another. The end of one thing is simply the beginning of the next. But modern society resists this truth. It clings desperately to permanence, to the illusion that things can remain unchanged forever. We are taught to fear death, to resist endings, to see change as something to be avoided rather than embraced. But the seasons teach us otherwise. They show us that winter's stillness is necessary for spring's awakening, that autumn's falling leaves make way for new life, that summer's height of power always carries the seed of its own decline. The sacred cycle is not just about nature, it is about accepting the inevitability of transformation in all things. The ancients built temples to track this cycle. We too must build something, not with stone, but within ourselves. A new way of seeing, a remembrance of the truth we once knew, because the seasons are always turning. The sacred cycle has never stopped. The universe continues its eternal dance of creation and destruction, waiting for us to awaken once more to its wisdom. The seasons have turned long before humanity walked the earth, and they will continue to turn long after we are gone. They are not merely markers of time, they are teachers, guides, and reflections of a deeper truth, one that governs not only the natural world, but the universe itself. To live in harmony with the seasons is to live in alignment with the eternal flow of existence. It is to recognize that life moves in cycles, not in straight lines, and that every phase, growth, abundance, decline, stillness, is necessary. There is no escaping this rhythm, only the choice to either fight it or embrace it. The ancients understood this, honoring the sacred cycle through ritual, myth, and reverence. They saw that nothing truly dies, only changes form. But modern life has distanced us from this wisdom, convincing us to push against the natural order, to fear endings, to resist the quiet moments of transformation. But the cycle has never stopped. It continues, with or without us.